Hello, and welcome to Rory's Brainworks, where we get creative and see if it works. Today, I will be reading Chapter 6 from my book, and sadly, this will be the last chapter I read for my YouTube until maybe someday someone publishes this and I get to read the audiobook for you guys. I have the previous 5 chapters and prologue up already, so if you have not yet watched them, I highly recommend doing so. Especially if you watch and listen to this without having listened to any of those, because it's gonna not make any sense. But either way, I got my reading jacket on, and I am prepared to tell another tale for you. From the Warsinger opus, A Breaking of Bells, by Rory Thomassen. Chapter 6, Singing to the Mist. Potent smells of dirt and herbs wafted heavy in the front room of Mathda's shop. Ben paced nervously back and forth with a parcel of newly purchased black clothes for Shun. The young lordling felt oddly anxious as he walked from the dendra roots back to the ice lily extract. The reassurance that Shun was in good health and would be awake soon did little to stem his nervousness. Ben's hands gripped the ends of a vellum-wrapped parcel secured in twine that he had bought earlier in the day. It took an embarrassing amount of time to pick out something he thought Shun would like. Benjamin was never good with giving gifts. It was a difficult and stressful endeavor. No one had ever told him how to do it properly. Truly, what are you supposed to say? How do you react? There was a clumsiness to the whole process that the young lordling had never had the chance to finesse. "He says you may come in," Mathda said with a soothing note. Ben smiled and let go a sigh he didn't know he was holding. "Before you go in, my lord," the old healer said with a hand on Ben's shoulder, "I would like to discuss something I overheard in the night. Something your man said in a walking sleep." "Was it a weird language?" Ben asked. "Did it scare you?" "No worries, my lady. He does that all the time. I'm pretty sure it just means he's in working order." Mathda tilted her head. "No, he spoke in the Telur tongue, but, well, he spoke in rhyme, poetic, even. His speech was a flutter with symbolism, like a court singer weaving a tale. It was a sonnet, I think. He had the chance to repeat it a hilt of times before returning to a deep slumber." "Shun knows poetry. Poetry in rhymes?" "Oh, it's no poem or story I've ever heard." "And he does this in his sleep?" Mathda gave a half-sure nod. "I beg your pardon, Mathda. I've been traveling with Shun for a little over 2 days now, and I've only heard him speak enough words to fill the face of a golden sepal. I find this claim hard to believe." "I am old, but not deaf, my lord." Mathda's incredulous look waned as she recalled the experience. "Without deception, I could recite some of the lines," the old healer admitted as she began to stare absently behind Ben. Her words slowed and lost their way. "For some reason, I can't seem to get them out of my head. To behold all ravens that lamented her beauty. Deep tundra, black-feathered, their essence cawed ruly. Love violet, love freezing. I remember her burn. I found the answer, but she never learned." Now what do you make of that? Ben gave no answer. Without lies, he had an ominous feeling just listening to the words. They tugged uncomfortably at his chest. The young lordling gently shouldered Mathda out of the way and went beyond the door with a stern look that besmirched the normality of his smile. Shun was sitting up in the bed he was in. Blankets covered most of his naked body as he tried to grab at his gray, stressed linen clothes folded neatly beside him. The foreign man froze in surprise as Ben marched in with purpose. "Shun, tell me poetry," the young lordling politely demanded. He had forgotten all about the gift still tightly held in his grip. "Tell me a story." Shun looked over each shoulder as if Ben had meant the words for someone else. "No," Shun responded. "Are you saying no because you don't know any poems and stories?" "No." "Ah, so you do know poems and stories?" "Yes." "Okay," Ben said slowly. "Let me rephrase this. Did you recite any poems or stories you do know last night? Maybe when you thought no one was here?" "No," Shun said with legitimate confusion, looking around the room for someone else to reason with. Ben turned to Mazda and shrugged. The old healer beckoned him over with an urgent waving of her hand. Whether he is aware of it or not, he did so as I have said, Mazda defended as Ben inclined his ear close to the woman. What I care about is if he is fit for travel, Ben replied in a hush. He is my companion, not my traveling caller. Shun got out of the bed without care for his nudity and started to weakly unfold his clothes. Ben and Mazda quickly turned their backs on the man and continued their whispered exchange. Yes, well, he is as physically fit as any man, as you just saw, Mazda responded hurriedly. Shun shook the cold out of his body like a dusty rug. He healed faster than any of my patients before him, a testament to his exemplary constitution. Good. Haste is something I intend to make, Ben said as he tried to choke the blush flourishing into his cheeks. I would like to square up all expenses made to you. 3 petals should do it. Usually more, but I didn't have to use as much medication as I normally do. Ben placed a golden sepal in the healer's hand, and he turned slowly to look behind him. Mazda looked at the coin warily and then back to the young lordling as his head swung back forward. Shun was still in a state of undress. Wicker and Willows, just take the sepal as a way of apology for my behavior when we first met and the burden we have caused you. That and I ask a difficult favor of you now. Would you be so kind to help dress my man? Ben pushed the parcel into Mazda's hands. We're good friends, but we aren't exactly close enough for something like this. Without lies, I don't know what to do right now. Mazda closed her hands around the coin and debated for a moment before she shrugged. As you wish. I have seen folk do much worse for half as much. And I also don't know how to reply to that. Mazda turned to hand the parcel to Shun as Ben walked out of the room as quickly as he could. The growing blush he wore warmed his face. He didn't think himself easily embarrassed, but here he was, looking the fool as he tried to rush out of the shop. How was one supposed to prepare for an engagement like that? No tutor he had ever learned from ever gave him the appropriate protocol to give a gift to your new naked friend. Weiter was waiting dutifully for Ben outside. The horse was richly garbed in leather armor, waiting impatiently as usual. The gelding was garnering more attention than necessary as it pranced in place. Ben busied himself with checking the integrity of his bags and wares attached to the saddle. The young lordling was fiddling with a loose clasp when he heard a mumbling behind him. Startled, Ben pivoted and threw a fist at Shun, who just leaned back gracefully to dodge the errant blow. The two stared at each other like animals spooked at a watering hole, wondering if they should step away or stay and drink up the awkwardness. Shun was wearing the black clothes Ben had bought. The velvet doublet was untucked, and the trousers were a little bit long, but the leather belt fit snugly around his middle. Ben smiled. He didn't expect the clothes to fit perfectly, but the young lordling was pleased with his ability to guess Shun's size. It took a few hours, and second and third guessing, but all worked out in the end, it seems. The effects Shun always held on to were now wrapped in his old gray linen clothes. The tattered, frayed cloth looked like it had seen too many years and wasn't any better than the dirt-covered burlap he was previously using. Shun looked uncomfortable in the silence Ben left as he appraised how his friend looked. The young lordling scrambled to find the appropriate words. You look beautiful, Ben let slip. Golden, Cillian eyes went wide as Ben's brain caught up to his words. I mean handsome. I mean nice. You look nice. The clothes look like they fit you well. Shun did not want. Ben's stomach sank at that. You didn't want the clothes? But you're wearing them. Mazda, Shun said as his eyes crept from the ground and slowly went to the healer's entrance. Forced Shun. Oh, if it isn't a color you like, then we can get different ones. That isn't a burden. Without lies, it would make me feel more comfortable having you there to... No, Shun interrupted. Shun not want gift. Ben's mouth went dry as he left it open mid-sentence. Clothes, Shun said as he made a face close to begrudging acceptance. Clothes okay. Gift not okay. Listen, Shun, if this is about money, don't worry. You don't owe me anything. No, Shun said to the ground as he looked for a way to explain something. Forget. Shun accepts gift. No more. The foreign man held up a finger of authority to punctuate his reluctance to accept any more presents. No more, Ben agreed as his smile returned brightly. I beg you to bolster your hearts once more for me, kind people, a voice called from a raised platform by the central gardens. A herald, dressed in plain brown robes, was holding his hands to the air as people came together to hear the news he brought. Were it not by royal decree to spread this terrible news through the day, then I would have only burdened you once to hear it. Ben noticed the gathering throng was already preparing themselves for the worst news. Most of the folk were already in plain brown clothing. No accessories, no adornments, no fashionable flamboyance, just the solemnity of graven earthen browns. Someone important had died. Ben's stomach sank a second time, but far below the first. With a heavy song, I humbly call news of Mylon's death, the caller sang in a monotone note to the crowd. Shock and sobs swept across the gathered mass. The old king, ruler of the rose, forger of the first kingdom, Warsinger to the mighty fog, has passed in his sleep. Ben rasped a disgusted snort and couldn't inhale again. This wasn't good. The young lordling was far behind schedule. He was supposed to get past Marin's belt by this time. A stilted breath came back to Ben, but it felt like it climbed down ladder rungs into his chest. The first thing Ben felt was anger dressed in rage. The second thing was absolute sorrow. But he let the fury step in front of that emotion. Grief had no place on the road, and Ben needed to make more haste than he thought he did this morning. Suddenly, there were too many bodies around the young lordling. People had quickly gathered to hear the news and gossip, and the bodies only made it harder for Ben to catch the air he needed. Shun, we are going, Ben said with a raised sneer. You are heading to Marin's belt, yes? I'll give you swift passage. Come, now. Shun looked into Ben's eyes for the first time since he had met the man, and saw something he didn't expect. Without hesitation, Shun nodded his head and began to follow as Ben turned around, trying to part the people crowded around him with his sword arm. Hey, hey, hey! A bassy voice repeated as Ben's arm stopped being pushed into a wide chest. Watch yourself, boy! No one pushes me away! Someone's hand grabbed at the back of Ben's forearm, but he twirled around the grip, breaking the hold, and continued on his way. Hey! The voice bellowed again, and this time a hand grabbed at the back of Ben's own crimson doublet. Benjamin turned around with a quick pivot, breaking the hold again, and stared with burning suns into the face of a large, brutish man. If you raise that hand again, we will have problems, Ben threatened. I'm in no mood. Not now. Don't threaten me, the brute said. He had the look of a tired mercenary. And don't you start walking away again! Come back here! You don't know me, lordling. If you did, you'd be quick to apologize. I've killed men for less. Ben halted his progress again to slowly shift his front to face the mercenary. The only apology I will make is to the folk that have to clean the mess when I'm through with you. Ben's voice was stern and righteous. It was a rarely used weapon. The brute grabbed at the hilt of his sword, his mouth scrunched so tight it made his cheeks go white with the strain. Ben's own hand went down to the two swords on his hip. Do it, Ben said. Show your steel to me. Everyone around here will witness our duel, and I will make quick work of it, so go ahead. Show me your metal. Ben could easily recite 5 stories from the top of his mind of famous duels around the world. If this man showed any part of his sword in anger to Ben, then he would only need to show his in return, and by the laws of the land a duel would begin, and Ben would indeed draw first blood before this man could unsheath. Cillian eyes weighed people as sure as scales. The day had taken a sudden shift, plunging Ben's mood into dire purpose. There was no time for fools or cowards, and this man was both. "Vike," one of the other mercenaries said, "Hey, don't do it. We don't have the time." Ben knew that this friend was making excuses for him. The look in the brute's eyes started to buckle under Ben's threats, and Ben was sure he did want to cause violence against him and what he perceived him as, which was a petulant lordling raised with everything he wanted. But some lords learned the sword like some singers practiced the voice. This mercenary was debating whether Ben was the latter. The crowd around them did not help with this debate either. The attention drawn from the herald was adding a sense of unease to the confrontation. Most folk like to avoid fights if they can. Despite what Cillians might say, humans are not prone to violence. They like their peace as much as anyone else, but some essences float towards unnecessary conflict like rivers to the sea. "Are you, so bad at swordplay you need 2 swords?" the brute said. He was trying to goad Ben into anger, not realizing that Ben was way beyond that. Ben knew the clarity certain emotions could bring to stressful situations. Anger brought power to a fight the same way as any calm could. Both would clear the mind and drive focus, and both came with their own dangers. Ben wasn't one to fight with anger, but it was something he always wanted to explore more. One of these swords was meant for great things. Ben switched hands from the lower sword to the plainer one cinched just above it. This one was meant for the likes of you. "Ha!" the man guffawed. "If only I had the time." The mercenary's eyes shifted left to right in survey of the people that had backed away in case a duel did erupt. "Busy man. I'm sure I'll see you tonight, though." From the bed of your bitch mother, Ben thumbed his longsword out. He brandished the neck of his tang. Polished steel glinted off the sun, and it drew the shocked inhale of the crowd around him. "My mother was a Cillian Warsinger. A warrior worth 10 times the man you've turned out to be." The challenge was cast to the air. A song of duel began to drum in Ben's heart. The brute eyed the people again before returning his look to Ben. His hand was still resting on his sword, but the young lordling knew he wouldn't accept. Ben could see it on the man's face, as sure as he saw it in the panic of his friends. "Vike, look, a Mylon!" one of his friends said as he looked up the road behind him and then back to his large friend. "Vike, a Mylon is coming this way. They've seen the crowd. We can't get caught again. We need to go." "This isn't over," the merc said between clenched teeth. "Yes, it is," Ben said, assured as he relaxed and pushed the sword back in its sheath. "Now leave, coward." The brute went red and took a step forward, but his arm was grabbed by one of his men. Spittle shook from the corners of his mouth as he grunted in anger before he turned to run down the alley, away from the eyeless march of the now-coming Mylon. Ben was shaken out of his blood-seeking daze. Suddenly, he realized how much adrenaline was coursing through his body and how it made his hands shake. His mouth went dry and his breath was hard to take in again. Soon, the realization that a holy Mylon was walking down the street toward him entered the frantic jumble of his mind. Shun. Oh no, Ben also forgot about Shun. The man had probably run off as soon as Ben made a scene, and the young lordling was going to have to chase him down in the next few... Shun was right there, just behind Ben as he turned around. He almost actually bowled the man over as he spun, not really expecting to have him so near. The foreign man was huddled low in a loose fighting stance. "Shun!" Ben questioned instinctively. "Good! Wow, yeah, my hands are really shaky right now. Was that heroic? Did that look really heroic? Actually, don't answer that. That's not important right now. A Mylon is coming, and we really need to get out of here before they do." A woman, wearing a purple Mylon's mask on the top half of her face, was walking through the throng of people. She was flanked by 2 plate-armored guards bearing pikes. The procession looked like a pod of sharks swimming through busy waters. The mass of people moved to either side of the street and out of the way of her blind stride. Rich purple and gold-trimmed silk robes swayed gently on either side of her. She was a dangerous beast with ripples of humanity scurrying out of her way. "Wicker and willows," Ben cursed. "They are much closer than I anticipated." Ben faced Shun and kept his back to the Mylon. The lordling closed his eyes and began to whisper a calming prayer under his breath to hide who he was. They were words his mother used to give him peace before bed. A prayer to the Eldawine, the lost home. A holy prayer that put his heart at ease, that put his mind at ease, hiding him behind a song. The Mylon stopped near Viter. Ben could hear the heavy metal stomping of her honor guard. She must have been inspecting the horse, listening to the music of it, listening to the notes of the men that had just been there and the song of quarrel they played before leaving. The heavy plate footfalls fell again, and they moved down the street a little bit closer to Ben and Shun. Ben could feel it, feel that hallowed gaze. Ben's back felt suddenly warm like it was near to a fire. The feeling was unfortunately familiar. It sickened Ben, but he didn't let a single note of that emotion show through the prayer he had kept in his mouth. If Ben could focus that song near to his own essence, then maybe the Mylon wouldn't see him for who he was. "Is she, passing by yet?" Ben whispered to Shun. "Stop," Shun replied simply. "Yes, I know that," Ben hastily whispered back. "What is she doing?" "Trying to see something that is hard to see," Shun responded plainly. Ben looked up to Shun with a startled look. His eyes were almost extinguished of their earlier fire. Fear had placed water in the hearth they had been cooking in. Ben placed his hand on the lower of his two swords just in case. The gemmed scabbard at his side pulsed with power. Ben's eyes shifted back and forth, thinking, calculating. "Your Grace," a gruff voice said, "we have an appointment." "Yes," the Mylon said with a curious bell in her voice. "We do, don't we?" Heavy footfalls started again and sounded off down the street. "Gone," Shun said, as though he couldn't care less. Ben released another tremendously held sigh. "Wow. I was about to do something profoundly stupid just then." The young lordling slowly took his hand away from the tight-wound, oiled leather handle of that well-adorned longsword and shook the weary knuckles that had held it in place. Ben wasn't sure if he had actually planned on attacking the Mylon or causing a major distraction to get away. What did disturb him was how ready he was to do either. Instinct near battle was a force the young lordling surrendered to easily. His training in the high walls that bound him to Belrose, practicing with the greatest masters-at-arms and generals next to Atmanius DeFranco, readied Ben for moments like these. "Okay, I promise to explain everything to you, Shun," Ben said as he observed the furrowed confusion on him. "It's not random chance that the Mylon focused her eyeless stare on me. I just ask for you to be patient for now. Reserve your questions and come with me. Please." The young lordling climbed on the back of Viter and looked back expectantly. Shun stood with an aura of deep thought, looking back up to Ben's eyes once more. It compressed time, and Ben could see the way Shun was weighing the world with a weary essence. It seemed like Shun constantly found himself at crossroads, and one always led down a predictable path of logic and reason, the common road most folk would walk. It had a clear path, safe and secure dirt roads undisturbed by the idea of change. Another road opposite waved Shun over with all the good intentions seclusion could offer. A silent walk free from constraints, free from the manacles most didn't notice they bound themselves to other people with. A lonely path that masked pain with the comfort of loathing. That path was likely well worn by Shun. You could read it in his eyes. The last of these paths was what Ben felt he offered. Something entirely different with no sure outcome. It was off the roads entirely. Adventurous as it was mysterious, there could be danger and there could be absolution. It was a place where destiny was spoken in present tense. Shun took 2 steps and leapt onto the back of Viter. Ben turned his head forward and smiled as he nudged the proud Palayan strider into a trot like he hadn't just been furious moments before. Ben was still feeling the pressure of the news of Mylon's death, but this one gesture from Shun was an amazing victory. Ben could not explain the warmth in his chest when he first met Shun. He could not explain how hollow he felt when Shun had up and left, but here it was, back again. A sweet warmth that felt like everything was gonna be okay. And that must be what friendship is. That must be fate. Ben maneuvered the sleek horse through the thick morning crowds of the city. He did his best to make a pace of careful haste through the streets. Once the traveling duo had crested past the northern gates, a gentle wind pushed at their backs and open roads with wide plains stretched out before them. Ben leaned close to Viter. "Can you feel that, friend?" he whispered on a heartfelt voice to his strider. "That is the wind. Can you hear its song? Does it sing to you like my song? My purpose? We have a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of travel. Know as I know what lies ahead. The wind knows just the same, and I need you to soar. Run, my friend. Do not simply chase the wind, Viter. Make it follow you now. Run!" Viter inhaled a sharp note of effort and snorted a deep challenge. The power of the strider showed. The hooves of Viter broke into the ground, and the strider began a gallop with tearing speed. Dirt ripped from the ground and rose to the air behind them like a mighty plume of shifted earth. Ben smiled despite the growing nag of anger and sorrow in his mind still battling. The young lordling knew he had to come to terms with his emotions, but he wouldn't give it any mind right now. There was an adventurous story to be made. And this song was the beginning. There was a strong sense of duty that Viter felt now, and Ben could feel it as sure as it was his own emotion, so he replaced them. The bond between the two were reflecting a heart song of heroism, pushing back and forth like the dance of land and sea. Ben felt fervor in his heart, and the warhorse felt just the same. Another push of wind licked at their backs as the wind of travel slammed them from the front. "The wind challenges us, Viter," Ben laughed, ignoring that fear, that anger. "When I first rode you, I told my grandfather that the wind was your kin, because there was never a horse so fast. Your brother is racing you, friend. He refuses to lose, and you must run to deny him satisfaction. Does the rose not break the ground to grow? Does the river not make the land yield to its course? We were born to defy expectations. Run, Viter, run!" Ben spoke with an unending vigor, matched only by the over-the-top Palayan theater he was using. Worry could stand on the edge of his mind all it wanted to. He would give it no heed. Not right now. Not when he could do something about it. Ben's smile turned devious and steadfast. He looked to the horizon of the road without a shred of doubt. He could outrun anger, fear, and mourning. Plains dominated the landscape between Southland Garin and Marin's Belt. High grass and soppy wetlands were dotted sporadically by thickets of trees. They passed through miles upon miles of the scenery before Viter started to show any signs of slowing. It was an effort that would have driven lesser horses to the ground in exhaustion. "Ha ha ha! What a show!" Ben yelled. "Viter, my friend, if you aren't the fastest of your kind in all the land, then I will eat my trousers." The welcome of compliments spurred Viter into a trot. The horse held its head high and walked with a bounce of accomplishments in its chest, pushing out its powerful muscles that glistened with sweat. "Hey now, it's one thing to be proud, but it's another to be cocky," Ben said with a smile as he patted the warhorse's neck. He turned his head slightly behind him. "Shun, I owe you some answers and perhaps an explanation or two. I'll start with why it could have been very dangerous if the Mylon had kept her stare trained on me. As you are probably aware, all Mylon can sense your heart song, listen to your very essence, and in so can hear your intentions and emotions. And Mylon see a person like most of us look at art, but you probably already know this because it's common knowledge. I'm sorry, I'm still a bit shaken up, and I tend to ramble when I'm nervous. For some reason, I'm kind of scared to tell you the truth about me. Is that weird? It feels weird. Where was I? Well, some families share similar melodies, heart songs that play over generations. Ben turned a little more in the saddle to look at Shun. The foreign man was attentive, coming close to actually looking Ben in the eyes again. The young lordling was struck by a sudden happiness that Shun had followed him at all. Without lies, Ben was going to need his companionship soon. There was a lump building in his throat. Shun, during that time, hopefully would not run when it came to pass. Ben swallowed, but the lump remained. My blood is steeped deep in famous song, should I say. Very recognizable. If the Mylon had listened any longer, then she would have seen past the way I tried to mask my music and know who I was. I suppose that's another thing I should bring up to you, Shun. I think we've gotten close enough to let you in on some privileged information, and it might be... Ben lost his words as he glanced back to the distance ahead. The plains they had been traveling through were about to pass into a large group of high-reaching oak trees. The shadows of the leaf-blanketed canopy swallowed the road, but there was something off-putting about the thick darkness hanging solemnly between trunks. Tendrils of frost pecked at the roots of the trees, twisting like a knot of snakes up the bark and falling with a heavy puff. Soft white mist capped the ground a foot high. The road was being consumed by an eerie cold. Viter slowed and stopped. The horse had a good sense for danger and was additionally picking up on Ben's own feelings of caution. They shared a bond that transferred energy, and the longer they were together, the more powerful it became. Viter's natural animal instinct melded with Ben's training for war. Each and together realized the peril lurking a few gallops away. Young lordling felt the heat of the day for the first time. Sun was bearing down on him, and sweat began to form on his brow. The air was heavy with the pressure of a brewing storm, though. A form began to walk slowly from out of the darkness. Sultry and exotic hips swayed in a gait that lured the eyes into trapping. Each footfall was noiseless and made no wake in the mist of cold ahead. The woman coming into light looked beautiful, but dangerous. Built agile and strong. A predator, lying in wait. She wore dark leathers that shifted and ate up the light. They stole color. They stole heat. Clasps of gray frosted metal popped out in the uneasy movement of her armor. She was well protected except for her hands and face. Her wrists were clapped in old black manacles. The chain between them was broken in the middle and whipped as she walked. Her hair was raven black with shadow tones of deeper purple. Her eyes were a piercing violet destruction, and Ben realized he recognized her. The young lordling turned to look at Shun, and the man had a mismatch of shock and dismay etched stony on his face. Ben dismounted and stood just ahead of Viter and Shun. His hands were to his side, cautious but not afraid. It felt more curiosity than anything else. What was the winter's heart doing this far south and this close to spring? Ben bowed his head and spoke with a regal Mylon training. "Oh, mighty Exiliana, it is an honor to behold you. In Belrose the power of the night wind is well respected." Exiliana's lips moved, but there was no volume to her voice. A gout of cool air pushed from out of the space between Ben and rushed past his body. The wind had a voice. It carried a delicate note of relief and hope. However, the voice did not travel with the wind. The breeze merely transported the voice and released it behind Ben and in front of Shun. "You live," the wind whispered. Ben raised an eyebrow and looked back at Shun. The foreign man was now closer to confusion and dismay. This was the most emotion Ben had ever seen on the man. The young lordling turned around and tried to recover his composure. Speaking to a god was normally a right reserved to the Mylon. What Ben was doing was bordering on heresy. Yes, Ben started again. I and my traveling companion are humbled by your presence, frozen river. Exiliana mouthed more words. The wind carried them and tossed Ben's hair messy. The whispered sentence was deposited behind Ben again. Are you really here? The hushed call rang sweetly. Come to me. Shun slowly dismounted Viter and began to walk up the road toward Exiliana, but Ben held out his hand to bar the way. Shun walked into the arm and came out of a loss, looking at Ben. Ben didn't feel right. This didn't feel right. If the young lordling felt a warmth in his chest when something was right, then the deep, cold absence he felt now, the vacancy, was wholly wrong. Ben turned back to look at Exiliana with his hands still reaching out across Shun's chest. I mean no disrespect, Broken Crag, but what do you want of my friend? Ben asked with stern-bordered politeness. He is my charge, and injured at that. Ben's action garnered attention from Exiliana for the first time since seeing her. The train of her eyes looked him over precisely. It sent a chill down Ben's spine. It was a beautiful spring day, but it felt like snow could fall just between the two. And who are you? Exiliana asked as she craned her neck forward to focus the gaze more intensely. Two large boars walked from out of the shadows of trees and billowing frost that hovered just above the ground. Tendrils of cold wrapped around the noisy quills as they trumped forward. Sharp yellow tusks curved upward from their snouts. Their opened mouths had slops of expectant saliva pouring from them to the ground. Thick fur tufting around their back and between the quills looked like formidable armor. Ben suddenly made sense of the boar that had followed them just the other day. A scout, observing the lands as the eyes of winter. By the look of them, they looked more like warriors. Me? Ben asked. I am Benjamin Belrose, son of Gillian Belrose, grandson to Mylon Belrose, he who wielded fog, heir to the throne of Eastern Tell. Exiliana smiled as she took a few steps forwards, just near to the light. Is that so? Walk forward. Ben looked to Shun and nodded once to make sure he did not follow. The young lordling stepped forward a few steps, chest out, shoulders back, head held high on his torso, every bit the prince he was. Ah, it is you, Exiliana said with a titter. I hear that your grandfather's essence has just returned to the Eternal Mother. Ben looked down and took a deep breath to compose some of the swirling emotions inside, that lump returning. Yes, he said. It was foul play, Winter's heart. He was murdered. He had known for months that someone was planning to kill him. And he sent you away to protect you? Exiliana asked. Her question sounded hungry, as though the answer was something she actually wanted. Yes, Your Holiness, Ben responded. I beseech you. I know I am low next to the heights of the gods, but the gods know all, and I am in dire need. I need to know the identity of my grandfather's killer. And what would you do with that information? Exiliana asked with a coy Ben felt unbecoming of a god. I would seek vengeance, the young prince said hurriedly. Why? Do you know? I know I am small before you, but I beg for an answer. Of course I know, Exiliana said coldly. Why, I was the one that issued the command. Ben lost his footing. The vacancy in his chest that felt wrong was spreading throughout his body. A shockwave of weakness flashed from head to toe. What? Ben managed to say as he tried to stay standing. You killed Mylon? No, Exiliana answered. I merely demanded it of another. Will you kill them now? You said you would seek vengeance, would you not? Would you kill me now? Why would you... Ben tried to ask across the field. His hand was going to the swords at his hip. Why would you kill him? Because your blood is dangerous, Belrose, Exiliana said with an equal force. That sounds like a threat, Broken Crag. Oh, every word I utter is a threat. Without thinking, Ben thumbed his top longsword out an inch. Sun glinted off the steel. Exiliana laughed at the gesture. Her heaving breaths pushed tight against her shifting dark leather armor. The boars at her side shook side to side and rattled their quills. Is that a challenge? She spat in a laugh. A duel, truly? I'm not bound by the laws of man. We were wondering where you were. I didn't expect to have you delivered to me along with, well, something else I wanted. If you wanted a duel, then you should have challenged a more honorable god. I'd rather just kill you. That was the plan anyway, Belrose. Exiliana began to hum and wave her hands. She flung out her palm in a wild movement. An icicle as thick as her forearm coalesced in front of her fingers and loosed as though shot from a bow. Ben had little time to react, but his reflexes were honed and guided him instinctively. Ben unsheathed and moved the blade up to deflect the frozen dagger in one fluid motion. An explosion of steel and ice shattered the air with a clamor of tinkling debris. As soon as the ice was deflected, it flash froze and completely destroyed the sword. Sharp fragments were sent soaring in all directions. Ben stood in the aftermath of the blow with a few cuts crossing his exposed skin, slits that started to pebble with blood. His amber eyes were once again fire, and they stayed fixated on Exiliana. He threw down the last remnants of the sword. A handle and a jagged tang impacted the earth at his feet. Well then, the young lordling said as he brought down his hand to grab at the lower sword's grip. It was his only other weapon now. He felt calm. Exiliana slowly clapped. Impressive, but it won't matter. In a minute Ben thumbed the rich decorated sword out an inch. A harp plucked a loud and booming chord as a part of the blade tasted the air. Exiliana silenced immediately as the notes played. Her radiant violet eyes grew wide. The goddess sucked in air as one foot stepped back. Was that fear? Do gods fear? What do they have to be scared of? Ben used to think they were all benevolent a moment ago, and that was quickly crushed. What do we really know about them? Only what the Mylon tell us. Omiklai, Exiliana gasped. Ben looked down at the inch of the blade exposed. A fog was already starting to push out of the sheath, push out of the blade and fall to the ground around Ben. You know this blade? Ben asked. Of course you do, don't you? It is the sword that created a kingdom. You know what it has done, what it can do. Exiliana took a step forward with hands gripping daggers made of ice, but she hesitated. She wanted to go forward, she wanted to attack Ben, but the fear she felt was powerful and it rooted her feet. Kill him! Exiliana shouted as she pointed out towards Ben. The boars at her side sprinted forward, ice blue tips of their quills shaking violently. Ben closed his eyes and gripped the handle of the sword with a calm focus. His smile beamed warmth in the coolness of the air that reached out for him. He was a pocket of heat ready to break the siege of ice these beasts promised. The young prince mouthed a prayer out to Telegrand. Grandfather, I will keep your promise, Ben thought. With my heart I defend. With my might I strike, and with my voice I sing the glory of her name. The boar's hooves tore the ground in slushy chunks. Snowy waves of frost played havoc on the dirt road. Their charge was trumpeted by the cacophony of their screeches. Harsh blue eyes, fiercely intent with rage, stared Ben down. Weapons of quills and tusks were ready to run him down and make a wretched scene of his body, but that would not come to be. Oh, how that would not come to be. Fog Ben murmured beneath his breath. "We have music to make." With a flash of speed, the sword was let loose onto the field of battle. Ben opened his eyes, amber determination filling the pierce of his concentration. The sword unsheathed smoothly and with untold precision. Ben sliced the air with the polished blade. The booming sound of a cord being plucked from a colossal harp sharply struck the space between Ben and the boars. A wave of thick gray fog threw the boars backwards, forcing them to the ground. They tumbled with a crash. Thrashing hooves and quills madly swung at all angles as the beasts clamored to get back to their feet. They began anew their charge toward the lone swordsman. Ben stalked forward again. Continual rivers of fog issued out of the gray swirled steel and fell heavy to the ground. The fog speedily built up and began to obscure everything below Ben's waist. He looked to be wading in gray water. All but the quills of the boars began to become swallowed up in the rising fog. The tips of their charge were seen rushing into the mist before even that was lost to the deep of gray. Ben's sight was not hindered within the mist. When fog was in his hands, her power gave him ultimate advantage against those within. These creatures would never know what was about to happen to them. Another note played, richly, a beautiful chord plucked loudly in the epicenter of the fog. A cascade of power washed over Ben, and he had never felt so confident. Rising petals, Ben thought. The young prince's mind voiced the forms as he struck with fog, the forms Mylon had taught him in the secret of night. Another note boomed, 1,000 thorns. Ben didn't realize at the time why it needed to be a secret, but the epiphany came quick now. Gillian, Ben's father, was supposed to inherit the blade, but he was a politician, not a warrior. Ben was trained to protect the blade, and the blade was meant to protect him. There were those who would seek it out. Another note cried out into the fog. Twisting vine, twisting vine, twisting vine. More and more an orchestration began to play. It filled the air with a song that drowned out all other noises. Its verse was delicate yet powerful. Each measure intensely resonated into Ben's chest, vibrating the very air he breathed, filling Ben's body with music. Music that matched his own essence note by note. The chorus built, it built and built. Swirling complex notations rang with the emotions Ben directed. Victory, it called. Belting song into the sky. Victory, it called to the tops of the trees and the clouds. A chorus swelled. It rose ever higher than before, calling victory to the sun and the stars and everything beyond. The mist gathered together and became a vortex. Power spun and spun with each string strike. Each note played hard and with purpose. Victory called out, sung by Benjamin, he who wielded fog. The music abruptly ended with a flourish of high-cast notes. A moment of silence capsuled the fog before it began to vanish slowly, drifting outward and upward, dissipating and becoming stretched thin into the sky. Ben stood with the sword resheathed. 2 drenched boar bodies were collapsed around him. Their icy quills melted and soaked into the ground. Their corpses were pierced and sliced. Ben looked up to Exiliana. "You insignificant insect," she uttered quietly. "Foolish little—" Ben interrupted her words by thumbing fog out of its scabbard an inch. Fog hummed, the slightest tremulation of strings. "How dare you bear that blade to me?" Exiliana yelled. The damage was done, however. As soon as fog had been threatened loose again, Exiliana had shirked back in fear. Ben challenged the god in duel, but more than that, he challenged her resolve outright, and she had failed. Her mouth closed sharply, and she bared her teeth in anger at Ben. Seething with a fury, she shook. The white tendrils of frost gathered around her. They came up out of the ground and out of the air and from her own essence and covered her fully. A bitter, cold wind blew hard from inside the trees and toward Ben and Shun. It blew away the frost and left nothing. Exiliana was gone, escaped, scattered across the land. After a moment, Ben sighed and nearly collapsed. The young lordling held himself up with shaky hands on his knees. "Oh, I'm gonna vomit," he said as he breathed heavy. "Oh, this isn't good." Ben began to pace back and forth. A god killed my grandfather. A god wants to kill me? Ben stopped pacing and put a hand to his mouth as it dropped open. I bared my blade to a god. I bared fog at Exiliana. I am in so much trouble. If the Mylon get word of this, then I am worse than dead. Oh no. Oh no. This is bad. Ben looked up to Shun and his eyes went wider still. She wants you too, the young lordling said with a finger pointing out to his new friend. Why does she want you? Ben stopped and stared at the ground, brow furrowing with who knows what emotion now. Wicker and willows, Ben cursed. If we live through this, then it is going to make a damn good story. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope you enjoyed that chapter. You kind of get a glimpse of what the book would be about. Technically, at the end of that chapter, you kind of get a good sense. I do throw a wrench in the works a lot and really make it something unique. If you've made it through the prologue up until this point, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did reading it to you. And I would be remiss if I did not bring up my other lovely sponsors for today, the wonderful people over at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rory's Brainworks. They are my story vanguard, my colonizers of dreams, and without them, these storytelling endeavors would be way harder to accomplish. Thank you for spending your time with me. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this madness, and comment down below what you thought of this chapter and what I had read altogether. As always, I'm Rory. This is my brain. I'm fairly certain it works. Be safe and go create some art.